On a New England pier where gulls stitched the sky, a sailor steadied my shaking knees and my late-blooming heart. He showed me how to bend, breathe, and trust the sway. This is how we learn to fall toward love and rise together every tender, ordinary day of our choosing. If this story warms you, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Join our caring community for more gentle journeys together. I moved to the coast because quiet felt like a doctor I could finally afford. I bought a cottage with clapboards so old it had a memory and a porch that turned creaks into conversation. My hair had more silver than not. My closets had more cardigans than adventures. I came with a suitcase, a cast-iron skillet I trusted, and a heart that had learned to take small steps around the truth. People like us, late bloomers, steady walkers, we don't rush. We learn by listening. We keep our hands gentle. We put coffee on and see what the day asks. That first week by the water, I made friends with the smell of rope and diesel and salt. I learned the bellbuoy's voice, kind, insistent, a neighbor reminding you the driveway's icy. I walked the pier in the morning when the air tasted like the inside of a seashell. The town was the kind of place where people wave with their whole hand, and a thermos means you brought enough for two. I liked being a stranger in a place that didn't mind strangers because the ocean holds everyone the same way. It doesn't check your ID. It asks only that you keep your knees loose. I didn't expect to meet anyone. That's the truth. Some of us learn to fit our lives into a quiet that doesn't pinch. I was content to be the man with the neat lawn and the good tomatoes. I thought maybe I'd pick up a night class at the library, learn to carve a bird from a block of cedar, or help at the school's reading hour with kids who smelled like crayons and questions. I thought I'd be a good neighbor who kept spare batteries and lent a ladder without keeping track. I didn't think about love. Not because I didn't want it, but because I'd convinced myself it wanted younger rooms to visit. I was wrong. I am glad to make a habit of being wrong about that. He pulled his sloop into the slip like he'd been taught by a calm uncle and a stern ocean. I noticed the steadiness first. His hands were sure and quiet, and his shoulders were broad in the way of a man who'd moved things and been moved by them, too. The boat bumped the dock, a soft kiss that said they trusted each other. I was holding a paper cup of coffee and pretending the wind didn't make me cautious when he looked up and caught me watching, which is always the moment I wish had a rehearsal. Instead of looking away, he laughed. A deep, face-wrinkling laugh that made the gull on the piling tilt its head like it was curious about the joke. "Morning," he called, the vowel stretched in that easy New England way. "You trusting that dock yet?" "I'm trying," I said. Honesty spilled out before I could tidy it. "I've always had better land legs." He stepped onto the pier with a grace that made the boards stop complaining. Up close, I could see the old scar on his knuckle, the pale line where a ring once lived, sun-lifted freckles, and eyes the color of the coldest August sky. "Name's Jack," he said, offering a hand. His palm was warm. His grip was firm without being a test. "Jack Turner." "Daniel Hayes," I said, letting my voice be as steady as I could make it. "New to town?" "New to most things that rock," he nodded, thoughtful like I'd handed him a piece of rope and he was figuring out what knot it needed. "First rule," he said, glancing down at the planks as a wake rolled in and set them moving. "Bend your knees. Keep your center low. Let it move you a little or it'll move you a lot. You fight, you slip. You soften, you stay upright." "Bend my knees," I repeated, like an old student with a good pen. The dock rolled gently. I rolled with it, trying not to announce my efforts with a face I'd learned from my dentist. He smiled. "May I?" he asked, and held his hand out halfway between my elbow and my pride. I nodded. He placed his palm lightly at my forearm and shifted my stance just an inch. "Good," he said. "There you go." For a moment, the pier and I came to an agreement. I felt ridiculous and triumphant all at once, the way you do the first time the recipe turns out like the picture. We talked about the weather like people do, but the weather by the water is a biography. He told me the wind would turn, that rain was likely, that the tide had its own plans today. He pointed across the harbor to a buoy nobody paid attention to unless they were worried. "That one tattles on the current," he said. "You want to keep an eye on tattlers." "Noted," I said. filing the information into a drawer labeled useful things I'll pretend I already knew. "Coffee any good?" he asked, nodding to my cup. "Only if you add company," I answered, and then surprised myself with the boldness of it. When your heart has been careful a long time, even simple invitations feel like moving a piano. We ended up at the diner by the bait shop, the kind of place where the bell on the door is more reliable than the clock, and the waitress calls everyone hon like a promise. Jack took his coffee black, like a man used to letting heat do the talking. I went for cream and sugar because we're all brave in different places. He told me he'd done 20 years in the Navy and the rest in boats smaller but no less particular. "I've chased storms I should have let go," he said, tapping his finger on the mug. "And I've had days where a flat sea made a fool out of me. You can't read a day by looking only at the top of it." "I counseled high school students," I said. "Different ocean. Similar waves." I didn't plan to say more. We're trained by our years to measure what we share. But something about the way Jack listened made the words feel safe. "I was a good counselor," I said, looking at the napkin dispenser because the napkin dispenser didn't feel like it could break. "A dependable husband, a dad who tried. But I was late to myself, to honesty. I'm learning. It's a strange mix of relief and embarrassment." Jack didn't flinch. He stirred his coffee with a spoon that had seen things. "Welcome to the rest of your life," he said. "You're right on time." Simple words, said with that quiet conviction that makes you feel the ground under your feet. You don't get a lot of those. When you do, you take them home and put them on a shelf where you can see them. We fell into a rhythm without announcing it. Mornings I'd walk the pier and he'd wave from his deck or call, "Mind your knees," which made me laugh, and then he'd smile at the laugh, and then we were both smiling like idiots and nobody died of it. He taught me the bowline, the knot whose confidence is in how it holds without choking. He said, "Rabbit out of the hole around the tree, back down." And my hands learned like my hands had been wanting something useful to do. He showed me how to coil a line so it doesn't tattle on you by tangling at the first chance. He gave the wind names like it was kin. "Sue Wester comin'," he'd say, and I'd nod like I could smell it too, and a week later I could. He taught me to listen for the difference between a gull telling jokes and a gull telling lies. I told him about the way teenagers' shoulders sit lower when an adult says, "You're not in trouble. You're just human." We traded skills like baseball cards, and it felt like the best kind of currency. One gray morning, the dock had a sheen like a memory of rain. We were carrying a cooler to his boat for a quick trip out past the breakwater, and my foot found the single mean patch of moss. Time slowed. The cooler decided to audition for percussion. In the breath between balance and gravity, I remembered what he'd said. "Bend, breathe, soften. Fall toward." I did, not gracefully, but obediently, and I didn't bang anything that would announce me as a fool for a month. Jack's hands were there, not claiming, just catching. "You fell good," he said, and the pride in his voice warmed me where the dock had cooled me. I laughed, that surprise kind of laugh that jumps out before you can polish it. And he laughed too, and there we were, two grown men in rain jackets, grinning like the world had done us a small kindness. Because it had, that afternoon I invited him to supper. And he said yes, like a man who knows better than to pretend he isn't hungry. I made a stew the way my mother taught me, onions until they forgive you, then carrots, then potatoes, then everything that needs time. He showed up with a loaf of sourdough from a neighbor and a bunch of parsley like a bouquet for people who mean it. He washed his hands at my sink like it was a ritual, and we ate with spoons comfortable with their job. We talked about grief like people who had written their names on that clipboard more than once. We traded stories about parents who loved us in the shape they could, and the way love can be a house with rooms you never entered because you were afraid of the mirror. We told the truth gently, and when the truth ran out of breath, we let quiet do some of the talking. The radio murmured a station too soft to have commercials. When our hands met on the table, it wasn't a trumpet blast. It was the sound of a latch sliding home. The first storm we tied down together taught me more about marriage than any counselor or pastor ever did, and I say that as a former counselor. He showed me how to snug a line without insulting it, how to trust the give and good rope, how to leave enough slack for the boat to move and not enough to bang her brains out. He looked at me, quick, sure looks that said, You've got this. The way you want someone to look at you not because they're testing you, but because they see you as capable. If you haven't had that, I wish it for you. We hunkered in the cabin with the rain drumming a tune that's older than language. He poured coffee from a red thermos. He told me about nights in the South China Sea when the sky was so black the stars felt like salt flung by a big hand, and how the water could lift a destroyer like it was a toy you might forget on the edge of a tub. I told him about a kid who came to my office every day at exactly 2:07 and sat exactly where he could see the door, and how sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is sit still and let someone keep watch with them. The storm passed with dignity, as storms sometimes do when they've made their point without breaking anything irreplaceable. We walked the pier in the gull-chewed light and picked up what fear had blown down. 2 gloves, not a pair. A flyer advertising a fish fry, now a paper lace. Somebody's blue bucket that would forgive you for taking it. We went home to my porch where the step had swelled and would need planing. The world gives you small work after a big scare to coax you back into your hands. I told my daughter about Jack over tea in a little bakery that keeps its sugar in old jam jars. She looked at me the way she looked at puzzles when she was 10, except softer now. "Dad," she said, her hand covering mine, "you're not late. You're right where you belong. I'm glad your heart has somewhere kind to land." The baker pretended not to listen, and then put an extra cookie in our bag, like consent written in butter and flour. Not everyone clapped. That is true, and we'll speak it because truth is a steady chair. A friend of many years went quiet in the old way that says they're sorting their own pile of feelings, and I let them. Another said, "Good for you," like a medal I hadn't asked for. And then some surprised me in the good direction. Showed up with soup and a 6-pack and that simple dear question, "When do I get to meet him?" If you've ever feared the door would slam and then found it opening wider, you know that sound. We made a life by making choices that looked small and felt enormous. The toothbrush on the sink that wasn't lonely anymore. The second pair of slippers by the door, his jacket on my hook like a sentence finished without force. We named the dog that found us harbor because he followed us home from the pier and napped with a certainty I envied. His collar jingled like a small wind chime. He learned to keep his distance from hooks, and he learned to lean his whole head on my knee when news from the radio made my shoulders climb toward my ears. Winter taught us another set of lessons. Because every season has its dictionary. Jack believed in wool socks and going outside every day, even when the air had opinions. I believed in second blankets and soup thick enough to set a spoon upright. We split the difference in the way long-term kindness does. We labeled the freezer meals with a thick marker and kept the medication list on the inside of the cabinet door. We weren't afraid of those conversations. Age teaches you that planning is love with a clipboard. We set up healthcare proxies like you'd set out clean towels for company. We made a folder called When and put it where the other could find it, and then we went and made chili and danced in our socks while the pot murmured. A lighthouse keeper told us once, "Light arrives in pieces. Our job is to arrange it so someone far off can see it whole." We climbed the lighthouse stairs on a day so clear the horizon felt like a promise. Jack looked out at the flat line where sky and water shake hands and said, not for the first time, "I don't want to stand still anymore." We stood shoulder to shoulder, and I said, "Me either." And it felt like a vow that had more to do with breakfast and doctor's appointments than fireworks. And that made it holy. We had a scare at midnight the winter after we met. Jack's brother called about their mother, a fall on the kitchen floor, a fracture that scared more than it harmed. We drove south in the uncomplicated dark of a 2-lane road. At the hospital, we practiced the quiet heroics of paperwork and vending machines. He told the nurse about medications and allergies. I gave the information I could and stepped back when blood meant family and family meant history. We moved as a unit, one person filling the cup when the other person needed both hands for worry. She was okay. We drove home with a relief that made everything feel newly issued. "Thanks," he said at my fridge, the good light on his face. "We did that together," I answered, and the truth sat down between us and stayed. Thanksgiving on the wharf is what you think it is. Too much food, not enough chairs, gratitude spoken with mouths full. Someone said grace with calloused hands open, which is my favorite kind. We took only what we could eat. We brought chowder that would get us disinvited in Maine and applauded in our town. Mabel, a widow with eyes that had seen both storms and the days after, tapped my arm. "You boys hold on to each other," she said. "The wind gets meaner some winters." We nodded and brought her a second slice of pie because medicine comes sugared sometimes. Jack's Navy buddies met up in our town one spring, the kind of men who carry history in the way they stand. They hugged in that full-bodied way men deserve to hug more often. Ortiz, a man with a voice like a boat engine idling low, said, "This man saved my life off Okinawa, taught me how not to fight the wave. Said, 'Breathe, fool, I'm coming.'" He clapped my shoulder. Looks like he found someone to fall toward when it's his turn. I had to look at the water for a second to keep my voice. "He did," I said. "He absolutely did. There was a day the boom swung wrong. It happens. You check the halyard, you trust your lines, you lose a little focus, and the day reminds you it doesn't negotiate." Jack went back into the combing and then down. The sound he made was the sound that empties a person of everything they thought was important. I was there. His eyes were open, and I spoke his name like it was a rope thrown right. He breathed. He moved his fingers. "I'm okay," he said, a soft wince under it. I fell. I nodded, because sometimes you need someone to say that what just happened did. "You softened," I said, the words landing like a blanket. "I softened," he agreed, and we turned for home. Careful, kind. You have to let your fear ride too, but you don't have to give it the wheel. We made a celebration that wasn't a wedding in the official sense, though the law would have shook our hands. We set up a backyard with strings of lights like a constellation we could afford. We invited the people who would hold us to our promises and hold us when we forgot what we promised. We promised to tell each other the truth even when the truth was, "I'm scared and it's making me bossy." We promised to be each other's lighthouse and harbor, to signal and to shelter, to shine and to be a place to rest. My daughter raised a glass and said, "Love takes its time, but it does arrive," and nobody corrected her because nobody needed to. We danced in shoes that understood our feet and played a song about forever that sounded like mornings more than fireworks. The dog snored on the porch the night we decided to write letters to our younger selves. Mine said, "You were not broken. You were bent in a wind you learned to name. It kept you from snapping. You will find a man who teaches you to fall without bruising, and you will teach him that stillness is not the same as stopping." I folded it and put it in the drawer with old photographs, not as a shrine, but as a map. Jack read his quietly and tucked it in his wallet, which holds not just dollars, but the tiny, stubborn proofs of a life. We taught a dock class for seniors one Saturday because Jack said, "There are a lot of us who stayed on shore not because we wanted to, but because nobody told us how to step." We called it learning to fall gracefully. And yes, the insurance paperwork was a character. We lined up life vests in a row like cheerful fruit. We taught bending knees and breathing the way you explain the good parts of a poem. A widower stepped on and back, and then stayed, and the harbor made a sound you only hear if you're very quiet. We gave out cookies so no one could go home and say they did something brave on an empty stomach. Not every day was a postcard. There were doctor's visits with waiting rooms that hum and call your name only when your magazine gets interesting. There were nights when the weather chose a lullaby in a key we didn't like. There was the time my ankle found the edge of a step and reminded me I am a man who has ankles. I fell, knees, breath softened, and landed in Jack's lap of attention. He wrapped the elastic, kissed my temple, and said, "This is the deal. We fall, we help, we don't pretend we hover." Harbor put his chin on my knee like a good nurse. We watched a documentary about lighthouses and shouted opinions about Fresnel lenses like men who apparently had them. Sometimes the power went out, and sometimes it stayed on after we'd convinced ourselves it wouldn't. We used the candles anyway because they'd waited all year. Preparedness became a love language. Batteries rotated, water jugs refreshed, the crank radio tested on a fine day just to hear it complain. People tell you planning is for pessimists. I say it's for people who want to be kind to whoever has to stand at your sink and figure out which light switch goes to what. Autumn found us at the orchard, choosing apples by smell and memory. We made sauce and lined jars on a shelf like a community of sweet small futures. The house smelled like gratitude and cinnamon. We made pies we delivered to neighbors and to Mabel, who told us again to hold on and then gave us a jar of pickles she said were too good to be legal. We laughed like men who finally understood that laughter is a meal. Spring came loud. Crocuses poking up like kids who forgot to ask permission. We took the boat out again, and I took the tiller while Jack watched my hands and trusted me. "She'll tell you if you listen," he said about the boat. And he could have meant me, and I could have meant him when I answered. "I am listening." We ate sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, the way good days are wrapped to keep them from drying out. He stood behind me, his palm sometimes covering mine. Not to control, but to remind me we were doing this together. We had a scare with his chest one July afternoon, the wrong kind of tightness, the ER's soft, urgent speed. The people there were kind, with a competence that feels like a hand on your back. It was a warning, not the worst. We came home with the kind of relief that makes you promise to do the smart things you already knew. We sat at the counter with pancakes at 3 a.m., because pancakes have a pastoral degree in bringing people down from the ledge. "We got scared," he said, and I said, "We did." And then we were quiet on the good side of a long night. I wrote down what he taught me, not as a list to sell, but as a way to keep the lessons in the light. Bend your knees when life insists on motion. Keep your center low, not as punishment, but as kindness to your balance. Breathe like you're responsible for teaching your body not to lie to itself. Tie good knots. With rope, yes, but also with your word and your time. Look up. The horizon will tell you things the wake cannot. Fall toward the one who loves you, because falling away doesn't protect you. It only makes the distance a second thing to survive. We budgeted and laughed about budgeting because flour costs what flour costs and boats cost more. We compared pillboxes like school children compare lunchboxes. We filled out advance directives and folded them neatly and then went outside to check the sky. We made the house safe to navigate in the dark and made our days soft to navigate in the light. We agreed to fight only when both of us had slept and eaten, and we put a kind arm around the other when one of us forgot. We told our stories into a camera one afternoon because my daughter said, "Dad, other people need to hear this. We don't learn to fall alone." We filmed on the porch with Harbor wandering in and out like he'd been hired for comic relief. Jack told the bowline story and I told the first coffee story, and we both told the one about the boom and the one about the ER, and the one about the night we sat with all the lights off and listened to thunder like it was the world clearing its throat. There were days nothing much happened, and those were sometimes my favorites. We read the paper out loud, skipping the parts that made us mean. We did the crossword in pencil. We forgive ourselves for mistakes. We watched old movies and argued about whether the hat or the coat was the better choice. We took Harbor to the beach and threw a stick into a tide pool and watched him consider the metaphysics of retrieval. We fixed a squeaky hinge and felt like heroes. We planted time because of the pun and because roast potatoes deserve it. I was not made less by falling in love late. I was made more. The years I spent quieter weren't wasted. They were a kind of stretching, a lesson in how to hold still so you can move well when it's time. Jack didn't rescue me. He steadied me. There's a difference. I didn't save him. I softened him. There's a difference there, too. We met each other like two hands catching the same rope from opposite ends. And if the rope sometimes burns your skin a little, well, that's because you're holding something worth not dropping. If you're listening with a heart like mine, if you've become so accustomed to standing on the safe part of the dock that your legs forgot how to bend, I want to tell you this because I wish someone had told me, you are not late. You are not a missed train. You are a tide. You come when you come. Leave the shore when you're ready and come back when you must. You will bring shells no one's seen, and you will leave the rack line cleaner than you found it. Find someone who will teach you to fall toward, and if you haven't yet, practice anyway. Bend your knees. Breathe out. Keep your center low. It will not make you immune to gravity. It will make you a partner. On the morning I decided to make this story into something I could give away, Jack and I walked down the pier named Courage, the name I gave it because names matter, and the boards creaked their old song, the same one they've sung for everyone who ever tried to stand on them. We stepped into the boat together the way we do most days now, without ceremony and with a lot of care. He handed me a line and I coiled it right. The gulls started something that might be an argument or might be a hymn. The water looked like it remembered last night and was willing to try today again. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said. And in that small word was a whole life. We eased out of the slip. The harbor opened in front of us the way kindness opens, without a gate, without a guard, with a hand extended. The bellboy cleared its throat. The sky shrugged into blue. I kept my knees soft. I kept my heart softer. The sailor taught me how to fall, and the falling taught me how to land, and the landing taught me how to look up and be grateful for the view. We go still.